Believe it or not, I've been wanting to make this video, but I just haven't got around to, yeah, I know, I'm kidding. Okay, so we're after the holidays and you probably have your camera now that you got for Christmas and you're gonna use it for your business or personal reasons. You wanna be an influencer, something along the lines, right? And you set it all up, you got everything the way you wanted it, and all of a sudden you turn the camera on and oh my gosh, it looks on. Why does it look like this? It's because you probably have the wrong settings or you don't have the right equipment. And before anybody says it, gear does matter. And it doesn't matter. I'll get to that in a bit. Also, by the way, this video is gonna be very basics. If you already have a camera and you know what you're doing with it and you just wanna have like the lighting set up, this is solely gonna go over the camera settings and what they mean and how they work and the whole this and that, how everything operates, all right? So skip this video. All right, for the folks that have a camera sitting in their closet, go get it and let's get started. So first off, I'm gonna touch on things for photography because that's gonna bleed into video. So real quick, there are 3 things in your camera that you need to be aware of: your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. Now this is the triangle of your camera settings. Now what do they mean? That's the whole issue here. Nobody knows what they mean. For ISO, let's put it this way. It is how sensitive your camera's sensor is going to be. By the way, you might want to check your camera. You could have a crop sensor or a full frame sensor. I have a full frame sensor in this A7C. All that means is the size of the sensor. So your ISO can range from 100, you actually go lower on some cameras, I won't really get into that, all the way up to whatever your camera can handle. Now for beginners, if you're shooting outside, try and keep this as low as possible. Now there are some issues that can arise with having the ISO too high. You could run into noise. That's where you get that graininess. It kind of looks like old film. Now, just saying that for creative speaking, once you understand ISO, you can break these rules to get some interesting looks. Again, today we're gonna cover basics, so we'll cover how to break those rules in a future video. Next, you have your shutter speed. Okay, in the most basic form, you have a door in your camera, okay? And that door opens up and closes. The shutter is how fast that's happening, okay? Here's what you need to know at the beginning. If you are 1/100 or lower, you should have your camera on a tripod. Anything above, you're okay. The reason I say this is because you will get motion blur. You don't want motion blur for a good, clean, crisp photo. Okay, so now we have your ISO covered and your shutter speed. All right, we've covered ISO and your shutter speed, so let's cover aperture. Aperture is how open your lens is. Think about this like the iris of your eye. The more it's open, the more light it's going to let in. Now, there is a caveat to this. Depending on your lens, some lenses open up wider. We call those fast lenses. And when you see pictures with that nice blurry bokeh background, you know, those like little light flares we call bokeh, that is probably because the lens is really opened up wide. This is a Sigma 24-70. This is the art lens, so it opens up to 2.8. It doesn't go any bigger than that because this is also a zoom lens. It does zoom in and out. Now, if you have a prime lens, it won't zoom in and out. So you hear people talking about a portrait lens, the nifty 50. That is a very good portrait lens. I like portrait lenses all the way down to 35. And what you get with those prime lenses is usually a wider aperture. So those will go down all the way to 1.4, maybe 1.2 sometimes, depending on the lens. So let's just put it this way. The lower that number is, the blurrier the background can be. Now, again, this is to be careful with. Just because you have a lens that can go down that low doesn't mean you need to shoot like that all the time. Yes, the blurry backgrounds look beautiful and you get some amazing shots with them. But if you want to sharpen your lens up, it's not going to usually sharpen up till 5.6. That's when it's really going to get sharp. Generally, when I'm shooting video, I try to keep it around that 5.6, anywhere from 4 to 5.6. For pictures, I do shoot really low. I like my blurry backgrounds, but it really is dependent on what you're shooting. I shoot a lot of people. I want that blurry background. It looks more cinematic in my eyes. Now, one thing to be very clear about, you know all 3 now, right? You have your aperture, your ISO, and your shutter speed. Don't get obsessed with this, right? Photography is an art form. So at the end of the day, you want to find your own style, basically, right? I can copy anybody's settings, but then I'm just copying their settings. Come up with your own style, mess with them, have fun with them, break the rules once you understand the rules. Okay, now that we kind of have an understanding of these, go practice and then come back to this part of the video because now we're gonna get into video. Video, you kind of lose one of these settings. Let me explain. When you're shooting video, your shutter speed has to stay at a certain number. This is called the 180-degree shutter rule. Now, the history of this goes back to Hollywood, and they actually had analog cameras, and there was a spinning wheel in there. Now, what happened was they figured out that at certain shutter speeds, the motion blur had effects that seemed natural. So they did a bunch of testing, and they figured out that 180 degrees, the 180-degree shutter rule, is the perfect shutter. Now, what does that mean? It means that motion blur looks more natural on camera. Again, you can break this rule. There's some really cool effects actually you can do, and you have to break this rule. Don't do that yet. Learn this rule, get good at it, then learn how to break it. So what does that mean? If I am shooting at 24 frames per second, I need my shutter at 1/, technically 48. Most cameras won't do it. This one won't. 1/50. What that's gonna allow is the closest thing to that 180-degree rule. Same thing with 30, 60, and 120. If it's at 30, you need to be at 1/60. 60, you need to be at 1/120. If it's at 120 frames per second, you need to be at 240. You won't wanna change that. Again, you can, let's just not do it yet, okay? But now what happens? Well, I have a whole video on this of what you need to do to fix this, because you can set up your shot and then you want your aperture, you want that nice blurry cinematic background. Oh my gosh, it's going to be super exposed because you can't change the shutter rule. So get an ND filter, okay? ND filters are super, super helpful. Just a little bit of how they work. If you spin them, they get darker. If you spin them, they get lighter. This is called a variable ND filter. It's one you slap on there and then you're able to spin it and get different variations of it. And this is where I want to talk about what gear matters, okay? If you don't have one of these, you're gonna have to mess with your aperture, because even having your ISO at 100 isn't gonna give you the effect you want. You can pick these up on Amazon. You can, people say there's different qualities of them. Honestly, this is an Amazon one. I love it. I haven't had really any issues with this one. Sometimes when you get them, you might get that cheap like X. Be careful. I can link this one below. I'm not gonna have any affiliate link or anything with it, just in case you want it. Without having this ND filter, well, this is what I call it. You are slave to the shutter. Because your ISO is down, you have to go up your aperture, and you're just not gonna get the look you want, and that's where these come in really, really handy. Unfortunately, when you get into content creation, this is something that happens. You have to get a piece of gear because of the effect you want. Gear doesn't matter when it comes to storytelling. Anybody can tell a good story on any camera. The best camera is the camera in your hands. However, if you're wanting to tell that story in a certain way, that's where more gear comes into play. But do you need that gear to make a good story, to make a good video? No, you don't, okay? I have seen amazing videos that are shot on iPhones, that are shot on iPads. There are so many different types of videos you can do, and you don't need a big fancy camera for it. So don't let that get you down. Don't get the whole obsession with getting all the gear. Trust me, I went through that. Don't do it. Okay, so that should cover just about everything you need to understand the triangle, okay? Now, there are a couple settings on your camera that you probably wanna look for. Some other housekeeping things, okay? If you're gonna shoot 4K video, you want a fast card. And these cards are rated by a V. So I have a V90 card. It's 300 megabytes per second. Writing speeds. What this allows you to do is have better 4K footage. You can shoot, some cameras won't even let you shoot certain types of 4K if you don't have the right card in. Now, most cards will shoot 1080, you're gonna have no problem. For the world of content creation, 1080 is still perfectly fine. You don't need 4K. 4K looks good, it looks professional, but if you're just making videos for the internet, 1080 is just gonna be just fine for you. Now there are a couple things. You have this dial on the top of your camera. When you're shooting video, make sure that it is in the film setting. Your other ones, your M is gonna stand for manual, your S is gonna stand for shutter priority, your A is gonna stand for aperture priority. A good one for photography, honestly, if you're just starting out, is aperture priority. Play around with that one. You'll probably end up really liking it. Do I recommend always learning manual? Absolutely. The more you know about your camera, the better your photos are gonna come out, the better your videos are gonna come out. Some other settings you might help you out is focusing. I like it when my focus is actually with the button. So when I'm about to take a picture and I press down, it focuses the camera. With video, I like to go on continuous focus. So continuous focus, at least in the Sony's, it has a tracker in there, and then you can tell it for this area, the center, the face, and it will continuously autofocus to track you. All right, I think that's all I have for you today because this is just going through the basics. Anything else I talk about after this, it could be a little bit harder. So I leave you with this, go have fun, go use your camera. Don't let this sit on a shelf because it's such an amazing tool. Being able to use it, having the knowledge how to use it can, one, turn into a career. The other side of it is just having fun with the camera, making memories of you and your friends and your family. And lastly, gear doesn't matter that much. This is all shot on my phone right now.